Hello and welcome to My Security TV. My name's Chris Cubbage and I'm the Executive Editor for My Security Media. I'm here in Los Angeles on what is the last day of a 3-week tour around the US, from Los Angeles to Las Vegas to Austin, Texas to New York. I've conducted videos with security professionals around the country on 4 central themes: the role and value of security in our society, where security management is in terms of the corporate sector, business and industry, and the rapid changes in security technology, particularly over the last decade. 9/11 had a profound impact on the US and around the world. Even after 10 years, 9/11 is continually mentioned as a fundamental change the way the industry is perceived, the way it perceives itself, and the role it plays in our society. This video is a cut down of all of those interviews that I've conducted. I hope you enjoy this video, and full interviews are available on My Security TV and our playlist for the USA Security Professionals Tour. Thanks for watching.
I mean, I went from being a journalist covering law enforcement and security to being the Deputy Commissioner of the NYPD, but then later the Deputy Chief of the LAPD for Counterterrorism and Intelligence. And it was in that job that I really realized we needed to reach out and be much more engaged with the private security world because of their sweeping resources, because of the numerous people they had, and because basically they were the targets that we were supposed to be protecting. We couldn't protect those targets without private security and that partnership. In the FBI, it went beyond the physical threat. It went into the cyber arena, the arena of foreign counterintelligence, a threat of stealing our most valuable secrets, whether they were military, but also business, research and development. And then later, in the Director of National Intelligence, when you really looked at the threats to infrastructure, the idea of a cyber war between countries, or the idea of the surrogate war between cyber criminals and corporate targets, you really got a global sense that this is a much more sophisticated game of cops and robbers than I ever anticipated 30 years ago covering murders and robberies in the streets of New York.
Global terrorism, whether it's radicalization, jihad recruitment, preparedness, weapons of mass destruction. We deal with money laundering and international crime. We also deal with political instability, and they all converge. Each one is interrelated. For example, let's talk cyber threats. You know, a lot of people will go on glaze over as if, oh, heard it, I change my password every week. They don't understand that when Russia invaded Georgia, they brought down that country's command and control, their computers. The Israelis are probably behind Stuxnet and slowing down Iran's oil and nuclear capabilities. We shut down Iraq's command and control. I believe 20 terabytes of information were stolen from the Pentagon. Our intellectual property is being stolen. Our movements, I was covering the Bahrain Revolution, and police movements and troop movements were being monitored, and it was the Twitter revolution. We are so beyond birthdays and passwords.
Money's getting tighter and tighter, and you know, we've done a pretty good job. And people forget, you know, and I think that's been a real challenge, is keeping people saying, you know, we can't stop this. I mean, that's how we're doing a good job. Now, well, certainly we're far away from being where we need to be, but we are doing a better job. And so we have a challenge of complacency.
News media, obviously, will focus on the issues a lot more, but to date, there's been quite a bit of publicity around attacks. I think even from a consumer or even from an enterprise, most understand that there's a huge threat. But I'm not really sure that the issue in the U.S. is that you hear the news so much that it becomes, overwhelming. And so you start to tune it out. And I think over the last 10 years, some of that has happened in the U.S. We've talked about cybersecurity so much that people will start to tune it out, both consumers and enterprise.
Security has a difficult justification because security works when nothing happens. So, or the other way around. If nothing happens, it means that security works. How do you justify the investment in security if nothing happens? It's controversial because on one hand, you pay me to make sure that nothing happens. On the other, you say, hey, you don't do anything because nothing happened. That's the whole idea. How you measure it, by the way, is by taking the consequences. What would have happened in terms of loss if something would have happened?
From a trending perspective, Chris, I've seen the entire industry almost lean more towards the corporate security departments, whether that be conducting due diligence on a country as to whether we should go in there, an emerging market, whether it makes good business sense because of either the political dynamics or the terrorism threat or the violence.
I think it's a combination of things. September the 11th was a watershed event as regards an awareness of security, and obviously it had a great impact on the security measures being taken at a lot of private sector facilities. I think that the realization here within the United States, the formation of the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate government functions, and them coming out with the statement that 85% of the critical infrastructure is either privately owned or operated, they know that this is a very important facet of national security.
I think that in many ways we have come a long way since 9/11 at professionalizing that industry, but at the end of the day, you still have corporate security departments that are viewed as a cost center and not a profit center. Therefore, the first to get cut in any kind of budget reduction is usually the path of least resistance, which is the corporate security department.
It's been a result of the economy's effect on our industry. We're faced with many challenges as far as the United States economy has. Particularly in relation to privatization, globalization, and its effect on the United States labour market, and the domino effect that has on outsourcing and the security industry. It's driving our wages low and it's keeping them low.
The key public safety issue is financing for our public safety personnel, for our police officers, our firefighters, the funding so we can maintain the services, where many cities are facing a financial situation that's very negative. That's the main issue facing us, is how do we fund along with the other services that we are responsible for funding. So the biggest issue we have right now is not so much crime, because crime has reduced significantly, but it's the funding to maintain the presence of law enforcement, the presence of public safety.
Now we are in a very, very difficult time in the U.S. today that, nobody has the money to invest in the human element. Everybody wants something tangible to buy for the department, something like a gun, something like a CCTV camera. And that's where we get in. Without the human element, it's just purchasing a dummy. We want it to be integrated into something much stronger in terms of the framework.
Well, when I first started in the counterterrorism business, we were still typing on typewriters. We didn't have laptops, we didn't have computer technology, we didn't even have cell phones, which is kind of hard for people to understand today. We had pagers. Technology aspects of the business, and since I've been involved, is one that's, I think, has really transformed the industry, as well as how the processing of predominantly open source intelligence in our post-9/11 world comes into play. I think that as I look around and as we do work and visits with your Fortune 500 corporations and security directors, one of the big things I think that most people don't realize is how small these corporate security departments really are for their global responsibilities today, which stretches from New York boardrooms to Australia to Europe to China.
The other aspect that I clearly see is the convergence with the network connectivity of the security. What used to be standalone video access control, now with that connectivity, it's really increased the capabilities of the user to manage the security program.
Because it's always evolving, always changing, especially from the technology perspective that changes so quickly, that if we don't do something to enforce that and set our own standards, something else will happen that will affect us, we will be forced to comply.
There's two things. Technology is catching up where we actually are getting tools that are helping us. And I do look at technology as a tool. It's not going to replace the human element, but it's going to help us. But I'm also seeing technology move so quickly that in some cases we're looking at 18 to 24 month cycles before they come out with something new. And government doesn't work that way. You know, we don't have that kind of funding.
Well, Chris, I think the developments are happening faster than government is able to react to them. I think government is an institution that can respond to an instant crisis instantly, but to looming crises that are moving slowly, like a glacier, but every time you look out, it's closer and closer, it's bigger and bigger. That's where corporate America, in fact the corporate global structure, is much more flexible, much more adept, much more adaptive, and government benefits from that.
It's those professionals, those individual security professionals that have the influence within their organizations that can influence their own organizations, that are more successful, that are willing to listen to what's going on out there, and they're willing to embrace new technology, that are really more successful, that are with organizations that are more progressive, that are more forward-thinking, that are willing to embrace new technology and understand how quickly things change. And it's not one industry really over another. It does seem to be sort of in pockets, but my own opinion is I think people can influence it a lot. It really comes down to leadership skills. I know folks that have been successful in different industries, but it really comes down to their own leadership capabilities and their ability to influence within their organization.
So communication is our first, I guess, portal in starting to get stronger in a particular area. We all do things a little differently, but we're all doing the same job. And so we all learn from each other. I think that we all walk away from in that. So probably information sharing is probably one of the most abused words there are, okay, or sentences. We talk about it, but we aren't very good about it.
The other piece of that I may add is there's a very big concern on information sharing about privacy. And one of the problems with this bill, at least that's been talked about in the media, is that data sharing opens up the issue of individual privacy. And how far does the government go looking at incidents on the network, and what can they report, what kind of data can they collect? So there's that balance between, you know, safety, security, and the rights of individuals and companies, for that matter.
I've noticed that there's been a lot of dialogue going on between London and New York as regards, like, there's a group that operates in London called the Sister Banks, which is the major financial institutions in the London area, that really support the police operations there. On a monthly basis, they'll have meetings, private security, a lot of the beat officers and that sharing information. So it all works really well together. So you got that international element there to a degree, but certainly within those cities, you know, a strong cooperation that's going on. It may seem in the interview today that I'm could be overemphasizing the relationship between private security and public law enforcement, but it really makes sense, you know, as regards to securing society in general, that it would occur this way. And I'm very hopeful that there'll be more increased cooperation as the years go on. And hopefully we won't have to address such serious threats as potentially some of these cities are facing.
When I first left the Air Force and then went into the private sector, but as a trusted agent, so you had your foot feet in both worlds. I was not an Air Force officer any longer, but I wasn't an actual private contractor. I was someone who had been an Air Force officer who was trusted and cleared to the highest security levels, and I worked alongside of my federal colleagues.
And then also remember, with our global war on terror and our activities around the world in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, there is that merging of government and private sector. So you have a lot of government clearances that are given to corporations so they can either process classified information. But at the end of the day, I still sense that there is a lack of granular intelligence that's passed to the average street cop, and that to me is the failure in the collective system. I look at these organizations like the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI in many ways, and still at the end of the day, that information is not getting down to that street cop, that beat cop that needs it to do his or her job. And I sense that that's still a failure. And I don't care where you are in the world, your first line of defense is going to be that street cop, and if that street cop doesn't know what to look for or is not getting that intelligence, that's your failure.
There was a need for groups of individuals to start to work on specific remedies for different parts of the events that led up to 9/11. The area that I worked on specifically was trying to understand how you could merge together the various systems operated by the military, operated by the civilian community, to be able to get a consistent, coherent situational awareness picture. So we spent about 3 years, up to about 2005, 2006, working very hard to see if we could get a consistent, coherent situational awareness picture.
One of the challenges in preparedness that we found is a silo mentality. We all look at preparedness or terror or transnational crime through the prism of our own expertise. But we all know these are multiple layers and it requires multiple disciplines to solve the problem.
We're looking at things, and we see that our members in the U.S. are looking at the business aspects of what's affecting the U.S. business and trade as it's on a more international scope, which I can tell you probably 10 years ago, our members didn't look at it that way. But now they're looking at it from a much more global perspective because they really have to.
To look at best practices, to look at emerging threats, to look at new ways to handle old problems or new problems that our adversaries, whether they're jihadists, industrial espionage, competitors, criminals, or other entities that are trying to disrupt what we do.
Overall, U.S. industries are very aware of the dangers of a mass cyber attack. There's no doubt about that. This week there was a bill passed in Congress for a cyber bill that basically allows U.S. private companies to share information. And that was always one of the issues, that legally you couldn't share attack information. So if I had an oil and gas company, I couldn't share with XYZ that I had had an attack, and I couldn't share that with the government. And so there is an effort underway to try to open up some of the legalized areas where companies can share information and be more aware of what the threat is. And the reverse of that is the U.S. government will then start sharing with private industry some of their intelligence about potential attacks and threats that are out there. So I think that's going to help quite a bit.
Sometimes you'll find what the United States, because the consumption and the amount is doing, works really well. But at the same time, we find out sometimes in other places it doesn't work well at all.
One of the things they've done very well in London is the cooperation with bringing private security personnel that are working in the facilities in London more into the picture as regards reporting crime or being made aware of crimes that have occurred in that.
In the international side, and so we're seeing more of that where there's no more borders, right? Literally no more borders. And I think as we see more of that happen, security as a profession will indeed be more accepted outside of the security, outside of security as an industry. And people will start to understand what security is really all about.
Again, criminals don't have borders. Only we have borders.
Only we do.
Yeah, we have rules, and they know what our rules are.
We have more and more devices. Today, we don't need to remember phone numbers because we have the cell phone with all the numbers plugged in. We don't need to even monitor anything anymore because we have CCTV cameras to monitor everything. But without the person behind the cameras, all we do basically is recording. What we want to do is having the person behind the cameras understand what he is watching before something even happens and apply some mitigation procedures based on what happened. It goes the same. It's not green or red light, whether it's good or bad situation. You have to analyze it. You won't know how to analyze it unless you're trained.
We need to better understand when terrorists might attack our airlines or our transportation system. So if you can imagine a timeline, what we discovered is that Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda start to plan for terrorist attacks 5 to 10 years in advance. So we started to move left on the timeline. We started to go back in time and said, well, how can we determine the targets that Al-Qaeda is potentially targeting? How can we see who they're going after? Because they have a very consistent template of surveillance, of planning, of resurveillance, and rehearsal. We took first responders, and these are people like paramedics, policemen, military officers. They were also civil servants as well as elected officials from various cities that we taught. And we brought them together and we formed Al-Qaeda surveillance teams out of them. Sergeants coupled with paramedics and firemen that would go in and do surveillance, and the only people that knew that they were in there conducting the surveillance were the chiefs of security. They didn't even tell their security forces because they wanted to see if their security forces noted something out of order. They brought in cameras, they brought in listening devices, in some cases they placed things on the floor just to see if a box or a suitcase might be moved. And in many cases, eventually the security staff recognized something was wrong, confronted our people. What we found is that these guys who knew, all of these people who were involved in law enforcement or professional security, once you asked them to step over to the dark side, if you will, they were incredibly inventive. And it was very interesting to watch how they would search for vulnerabilities. And when we went back to each of the casinos or each of the federal buildings or state buildings, as we did this across the nation, we sat down with the security staff, not only the security chief, but the security staff, and we briefed them. This is what happened. Here's where we think your vulnerabilities might be. And it was a great opportunity not only to raise the awareness and raise the professionalism across the United States of these groups, but it also continued to give us insights into how this might work. We had individuals that were working for us that actually went out and found online Al-Qaeda handbooks, how to attack handbooks. We actually used those. We explained how to set up intelligence networks, how to use people in your community that might be observing odd behavior to report that to the proper authorities.
But to your point earlier too, I think one of the challenges, and I do a lot of work and visits and a lot of talks and speeches for state, local, and federal law enforcement here in the United States. And one of the biggest challenges they have is, again, the information overload. There's so much information out there that you can get overwhelmed with the information. So in many ways, it makes sense from an efficiency perspective to outsource that to a specific vendor to narrowly define that problem so you're not spending weeks or hours or days looking into it. It's actually more cost effective to do that, unless of course you have an in-house analytical capability to be able to do it.
The main idea, and that's the weakest link, is the human element. Everybody now wants to invest in security technology. Security technology is a big industry, a booming industry, but without the human element, this industry is worthless.
The security profession, I think, is growing and changing. It's ever changing, and it's such a multidisciplinary profession. It's not as accepted outside of our own profession as other professions. It's like, you know, people get a CPA and everyone knows what that is. Not everyone knows what a CPP is yet. There is still the industrial piece of security, but moving towards a profession as those of us who are practitioners professionalize it so it becomes more of a profession. But it has to be a very deliberate movement where the things that we do are very much based in practice and research, so it can be validated and reliable. And we are moving in that direction. I definitely see a professionalism of security, if you will, where you see CSOs, where they are recognized as professionals, where it's not that guards and guns mentality.
About 2008, 2009, we detected a wind shift. We detected a sea state shift, if you will. What was happening is these types of companies like HBM were starting to see their contracts diminish. And in fact, what we were seeing is the money that was being spent on companies like HBM, that money was moving into the universities. And it makes good sense, because what's happening is that the government wants to see accredited programs that are focused on crisis and emergency management.
I think that not the wave of the future, just the simple reality of the future is going to be when you count up the number of police personnel there are anywhere in the world, and then you do the count of what are the number of private security people there are, you're going to see that there are way more private security people than there are law enforcement people. And in the post 9/11 era, when it's about if you see something, say something, it's about eyes and ears, it's about more than just who's coming through the front door and am I checking, but about who's watching the front door from across the street, and are we clocking that person, and are we saying, is that person have a reason to be there, what kind of observations, are they taking pictures? When you see the pre-operational phase for a terrorist attack, that's the kind of thing that a police officer on his or her busy patrol might pick up. But it's certainly the kind of thing that a security person in a fixed position, or that person who's watching a dozen cameras, has a much better chance of picking up. And that is why, on the level of being first-line intelligence for law enforcement, first-line observation team for law enforcement, if you will, and having the technology that, even if they figure it out after the fact, being able to go backwards through digital pictures, access computer records, cellular telephone companies and their ability to bring up not just who called whom and when, but what cell phone tower were they hitting and where were they really when they claimed to be somewhere else.
Well, I think that you're only as good as that frontline defense, that uniformed security officer that's helping you to protect the perimeter. If there's a failure or a breakdown in that, or if that person is improperly trained or doesn't know what to look for example, as part of the terrorist attack cycle, or has never been trained in how an organization conducts pre-operational surveillance, he or she is never going to know what to look for.
We have 425 commercial airports in America where we have police. Your country, Australia, has 11. Korea has 1. The United Kingdom has 37.
What we found at the end of that time, we actually went into the White House to brief the results of our study. We did a whole series of experiments that involved these systems and various airliners. And what we found out was, once the wheels go into the well after the airplane takes off, if there are terrorists on board, right now there are only 2 outcomes. It's binary. Either the airplane is going to continue on to destination and it'll be destroyed, and all the people will die, as well as the people on the ground, or it'll be shot down.
Predominantly, their problems are abroad in their sense, meaning that either their global operations are victims from tsunamis to terrorist attacks or concerns for events like Mumbai, or they're sponsors like for the upcoming Olympics in London, and what are the ramifications for that. I think it's very much first and foremost on everybody's mind. Again, though, I think that what happens in the field a lot is a long way away from corporate headquarters.
You know, technology is there to help us. It's a tool, but nothing replaces the human element. And I think that's one of the most important things about security and law enforcement. And it is really all about us getting to know each other.
All of that globally is the exemplar of why, across fields from terrorism to internal theft to external theft to cyber crime to organized crime, law enforcement and private security, that public-private partnership is unbreakable and stronger than ever, but also more necessary than ever.
So we can go back to having the maximum security standards, but move things back to being what you might say normal, because we do have to get back to normal.